In the winter of 1855, the Kellerman family, Hinrich, his wife Martha, and their 4 children vanished without a trace from their coal mine in the Kentucky highlands. Authorities claimed a catastrophic collapse had buried them alive, but no bodies were ever found. For more than 30 years, Harlan County accepted this as truth until a dying man's confession in 1889 revealed it was no accident, but a calculated murder disguised as tragedy, orchestrated by men who valued coal more than human life. Months before their disappearance, Hinrich, a German immigrant and skilled miner from the Ruhr Valley, had purchased 43 acres of rocky hillside for just $87, land deemed worthless by locals. By 1854, his excavations uncovered rich coal veins, and in February 1855, he broke into a cavern containing the largest, purest deposit he had ever seen, enough to supply Louisville's industries for decades, later valued at over $200,000. News reached the Cumberland Coal and Rail Company, led by the ruthless Jeremiah Whitlock, who had spent years seizing mineral rights through political pressure, legal manipulation, and intimidation. The Kellerman land was a glaring gap in his growing monopoly, and Hinrich's discovery threatened his empire. Whitlock sent his trusted agent Samuel Briggs to buy the property for $1,500, 20 times what Hinrich had paid. Hinrich refused, knowing its worth was many times greater. Briggs raised the offer to $5,000. But when Hinrich continued to decline, the conversation turned menacing. Briggs warned of the dangers of mining without powerful allies, hinting at how easily accidents could happen. Hinrich, recognizing the veiled threat, ordered him off the property. That night, speaking in German at the dinner table, Hinrich told his family he had seen the same cold ambition in Briggs's eyes that he had fled from in the old country men, who saw human lives as nothing more than expendable resources. Martha listened quietly, her expression darkening, as Hinrich described his encounter with Briggs and his growing conviction that their discovery had put them in grave danger. In the weeks that followed, the Kellermans became targets of an escalating campaign of intimidation. Their mail deliveries grew sporadic before stopping altogether. Friendly merchants suddenly turned cold and refused credit, and strangers began appearing on the ridges above their property, vanishing whenever Hinrich tried to confront them. In Louisville, Jeremiah Whitlock employed a familiar tactic for dealing with stubborn landowners: economic strangulation. Using the Cumberland Coal and Rail Company's influence over bank suppliers and local officials, he cut off the Kellermans' resources. Next came legal harassment, false claims. Questioning the legitimacy of Hinrich's land purchase meant to drain him in court. But Hinrich had documented every detail of his transaction, and his claim was unshakable. Worse for Whitlock, Hinrich began selling directly to coal dealers in Cincinnati and Nashville, commanding high prices and bypassing Louisville entirely. By November 1855, his defiance was costing Whitlock profits and inspiring other landowners to resist. Rumors spread across Kentucky's coal country that an immigrant had outmaneuvered one of the most powerful men in the state. In early December, during a private meeting in Whitlock's office, Samuel Briggs proposed a permanent solution. He had studied the Kellermans for months, noting their isolation work habits and mine layout. His plan was simple and deadly: stage a fatal cave-in during the winter months when the entire family worked underground. Accidents were common, especially in immigrant-run mines, and the story would raise no suspicion. At first, Whitlock hesitated, but the potential profits were too great, and on December 10, 1855, he authorized what internal records would later call the Pine Ridge Solution. The date was set for December 23rd, when snow and cold would slow any rescue attempts. Briggs arrived in Pine Ridge 3 days early, posing as a railroad surveyor, and spent his time timing the family's routine and pinpointing the exact spot to strike. He brought dynamite tools and the knowledge to create a collapse indistinguishable from natural failure. Meanwhile, Hinrich grew increasingly uneasy, checking and rechecking the mine's supports and muttering about dangers he had never worried over before. On December 21st, he confessed to Martha that he had been having vivid dreams of a cave-in, and she urged him to trust his instincts. They considered leaving for Nashville to visit her sister, but the winter yield was too good to abandon. Hinrich decided they would work 2 more days, then close for Christmas news, overheard by young Johann, who proudly repeated it to other children in town, within earshot of Briggs. On the night of December 22nd, Briggs planted the charges in the mine's main tunnel, arranging them to cause a chain reaction that would bury the working area under tons of rock, making recovery of the bodies unlikely. He even prepared a detailed geological report to explain the inevitable collapse. That evening, the Kellermans shared their final meal. Hinrich spoke of their successful week. Wilhelm chattered about the mining cart his father had promised, and Maria helped Martha bake Christmas bread from the old country. None knew that within hours they would become victims of one of the first corporate orchestrated mass murders in America, a crime buried for 34 years. On the morning of December 23, 1855, the Kellermans rose before dawn, ready for another long day in the mine, as a bitter wind swept across the Kentucky mountains. Martha packed bread, cheese, and coffee, while Hinrich checked his mining tools by lamplight. The children dressed quickly in the freezing cabin, their breath misting in the air as they prepared for another long day underground. From a ridge a quarter mile away, Samuel Briggs watched through field glasses, tracking every movement. His vantage point allowed a clear view of both the mine entrance and the access road, giving him full control over the timing of his trap. At 6:47 a.m., he saw Hinrich light the first lantern and lead his family into what would soon be their tomb. Inside, the Kellermans worked with practiced rhythm. Hinrich and Johann at the deepest coal face, Martha and Maria loading carts, young Wilhelm hauling smaller chunks, and little Elizabeth playing near the warmer chamber under her sister's watch. Briggs had calculated his charges to explode at exactly 10:15 a.m., the moment the family would be at their most vulnerable, too far from the entrance to escape. But at 9:30, a problem emerged. Thomas Hartley, a neighboring farmer, arrived to speak with Hinrich about buying coal for the winter. Briggs tensed as Hartley called toward the tunnel and began to approach. If the man entered, he could become either an accidental victim or a dangerous witness. Hidden in the trees, Briggs even reached for the pistol in his coat. After several unanswered calls, Hartley left a note at the entrance. Hinrich Thomas. Hartley stopped by at 9:45 a.m. About winter coal, will return this afternoon, and walked away. That slip of paper would later prove the Kellermans were alive and working normally just half an hour before the so-called accident. At 10:15 sharp, Briggs pressed the detonator. Copper wires snaked through the forest floor, carried the current to the dynamite buried deep in the mine. The blast roared through the mountains, shaking windows in Pine Ridge and sending birds scattering in a black wave across the sky. A 200-foot section of the main tunnel collapsed, followed by secondary cave-ins that sealed every chamber. From his perch, Briggs watched the dust plume rise, satisfied. Phase 1 of the Pine Ridge solution was complete. Now he had to bury the truth as thoroughly as the Kellermans. News traveled fast. The explosion's echo and the towering dust cloud drew neighbors to the scene within hours. Thomas Hartley among them, horrified to find the entrance sealed under massive boulders. Briggs appeared soon after, having looped through the forest to arrive as if from town. He played the part of a shocked surveyor, flawlessly offering sympathetic words while quietly discouraging rescue attempts that might expose his sabotage. When Hartley mentioned his note, Briggs dismissed it as unreliable, claiming such scraps often blew away in mountain winds. Rescue efforts began anyway. Men from across Harlan County abandoned Christmas preparations to dig through the frozen debris, their hands bleeding in the bitter cold. Women brought coffee and food. Reverend Isaac Thornberry led prayers. Children watched in silence, sensing the enormity of the loss. Hartley, racked with guilt, worked without rest, convinced that had he entered the mine that morning, he might have noticed some warning sign. Briggs encouraged that guilt, suggesting the Kellermans had likely ignored visible dangers, feeding a lie designed to shift blame from murder to misfortune. Briggs knew that survivor's guilt could be as powerful a tool as fear, and he used it to shape the narrative. On the second day of digging, hope surged when rescuers uncovered what looked like an air pocket deep in the debris. Shouts echoed across the mountainside as men called into the darkness, straining to hear any reply. For hours, the community worked feverishly to widen the opening until the truth became clear. It was an empty void, formed by the way the rock had fallen, holding no trace of the Kellermans. For Briggs, the false hope carried its own danger. The pocket was uncomfortably close to one of his blast sites. If digging continued, they might find dynamite fragments or a blast pattern that betrayed sabotage. He convinced the rescue leaders that the cavity was dangerously unstable, and when some refused to abandon the effort, he staged a small controlled collapse to seal it, disguising it as a natural shift in the rubble. The emotional strain was crushing. These were not anonymous victims. They were neighbors, friends, and in some cases, like Johann and Maria, part of the rescuers' daily lives. Men remembered how Hinrich had helped them with their own small mines, or how Wilhelm played in the dusty streets with their children. Women gathered in the church singing German hymns Martha had taught them, their voices carrying across the snow-covered valley. The loss felt larger than 5 lives. It was a blow to the belief that their mountain home was a place of safety. On Christmas Eve, Reverend Thornberry made the painful decision to end the rescue. After 24 hours of bitter cold, collapsing rubble, and no signs of life survival was impossible. The decision split the community. Some called it mercy, others surrender. Briggs positioned himself as the voice of reason, urging acceptance. Christmas morning brought the memorial service. The entire town stood in the freezing air, singing in English and German. Children laid wildflowers on the rock pile. Heinrich's tools were arranged at the entrance like a shrine, and Martha's sewing basket sat filled with letters of condolence. Briggs played the part of a grieving outsider, flawlessly, even donating to the collection for a monument. Though inside he felt a cold satisfaction that the operation had gone exactly as planned. Yet a flicker of discomfort surfaced when 6-year-old Sarah Hartley asked her father why God had taken Wilhelm right before Christmas. 4 days later, Harlan County Sheriff Marcus Webb began the official investigation. Webb, whose campaign had been heavily funded by Cumberland Coal and Rail, appeared thorough, sketching the debris field, interviewing witnesses, compiling testimony. But he never ordered a geological survey to test for instability, never questioned the improbability of the whole family being in the most dangerous part of the mine at the same moment, and never consulted explosives experts. Instead, he accepted Briggs's fabricated evidence, technical drawings, and geological reports forged in company offices, showing imaginary fault lines beneath the Kellerman land. Briggs's expert testimony was so convincing that Webb copied entire sections into his final report. Filed on December 30th, it concluded the collapse was the result of common structural flaws in hastily dug immigrant mines. While framed as sympathetic, the language subtly painted immigrant miners as technically inept, shifting blame onto the victims. Only Thomas Hartley challenged the report. His 9:45 a.m. note proved the mine was sound just half an hour before the collapse. And he argued that Hinrich's year of incident-free mining disproved the idea of fatal incompetence. Webb brushed him off, claiming even skilled miners could be fooled by hidden weaknesses. Briggs quickly moved to neutralize him, quietly spreading the idea that Hartley's guilt over not entering the mine had clouded his judgment, making him imagine conspiracies where none existed. Briggs understood that turning public opinion was as important as concealing physical evidence. He quietly reminded people that Hartley wasn't a mining expert, implying that his observations carried little weight. More effectively, he suggested that Hartley's constant questioning was holding back the town's healing framing doubt as an obstacle to recovery. The social pressure worked. Hartley stopped voicing his concerns in public, though privately he never stopped believing something was deeply wrong. In a diary entry preserved by his descendants, he wrote, "There was nothing unstable about Hinrich's mine that morning. The supports were solid, the air was clear, and the tunnel showed no strain. I may not be an engineer, but I know what I saw. Someone is lying about what happened to that family, and someday the truth will come out." The final and most effective stage of the cover-up unfolded in January 1856, when Jeremiah Whitlock arrived in Pine Ridge. His visit was a carefully staged performance of humility and empathy. Riding on horseback rather than in a grand carriage, he lodged with local families instead of the boarding house, sharing simple meals and listening to personal memories of the Kellermans. Publicly, he expressed grief and admiration for Hinrich as a symbol of American opportunity and immigrant determination. At a packed meeting in the Pine Ridge Church, Whitlock proposed that Cumberland Coal and Rail purchase the Kellerman property, now under county ownership, because the family had died without a will, and fund both a memorial monument and a scholarship program to train local children in modern mining techniques. He promised that professional oversight and advanced methods would prevent future tragedies and turn the family's discovery into a lasting benefit for the community. For an isolated town with few prospects, his offer of steady, well-paying jobs was transformative. Many residents saw it as a chance to escape poverty, and the prospect of economic revival outweighed lingering doubts. Opposition came mostly from Hartley and Reverend Thornberry, who warned that moving so quickly risked profiting from tragedy and dishonoring the dead. Whitlock countered with urgency. Winter was harsh, jobs were scarce, and families were struggling. Honoring the Kellermans, he argued, meant building a safer, more prosperous future with the coal they had found. After 3 hours of debate, the town voted 47-12 in favor of the deal. Hartley cast a quiet dissent, but accepted the outcome, saying he hoped he was wrong and that good might come of it. Within 6 months, Cumberland Coal and Rail had transformed the property into a large-scale industrial operation, complete with engineers, safety equipment, and organized extraction. Their public geological surveys revealed exactly what Hinrich had discovered, an extraordinarily rich vein. Yet no one questioned the timing. Jobs materialized as promised wages improved. Living standards, new houses appeared, and Pine Ridge shifted from an isolated mountain settlement to a thriving mining town. Success seemed to vindicate Whitlock's promises and erase the last public doubts about the Kellerman disaster. Samuel Briggs lingered for months officially to continue his railroad survey, but in truth, to oversee the smooth transition and ensure the company's narrative held. His constant presence reassured the town that Cumberland's interest was genuine, while quietly guaranteeing that the truth about December 23, 1855, stayed buried beneath both rock and prosperity. Briggs carefully preserved his image as the impartial expert who had guided Pine Ridge through its grief, never hinting at his true role. When he finally left in the summer of 1856, townsfolk publicly thanked him for his service during their darkest days. By the next year, the Kellermans were little more than a cautionary tale, a warning about the perils of amateur mining and the need for professional oversight. In the Pine Ridge Cemetery, a modest stone memorial, funded jointly by Cumberland Coal and Rail and community donations, listed them as victims of an industrial accident. Its inscription, "In memory of the Kellerman family taken by the mountain they loved. Their sacrifice paved the way for progress and prosperity," seemed to honor them. Yet it subtly reshaped their deaths into a noble offering for the town's future. The word sacrifice suggested choice rather than calculated murder, while progress and prosperity framed their loss as the cornerstone of advancement instead of corporate gain. For 33 years, this account went unchallenged. The Kellerman tragedy became just another line in Kentucky's mining history, cited by safety advocates as proof of the need for engineering oversight, but never questioned as preventable by anything other than better construction. Briggs returned to Louisville, rewarded with a quiet promotion inside Cumberland Coal and Rail. His handling of the Pine Ridge affair cemented his reputation as the man to call for the company's most sensitive problems. In the years that followed, he continued removing obstacles to Cumberland's expansion, though after the Kellermans, he preferred subtler weapons like legal maneuvers and financial pressure. Jeremiah Whitlock's rise was even more spectacular. The profits from the Kellerman coal vein fueled Cumberland's transformation into one of the largest mining enterprises in the southeastern United States. Whitlock was celebrated as a visionary who brought prosperity to isolated mountain communities, his company lauded for its impeccable safety record and worker training programs. The grim irony that his reputation for protecting miners rested on the mass killing of one family was known only to a small inner circle of executives. Their silence was sustained by shared guilt, mutual self-interest, and the knowledge that exposure would not only ruin them, but collapse a company that thousands of workers and families depended on. But like seams of coal hidden deep in the earth, truths have a way of forcing themselves to the surface, and the secret of Pine Ridge would not stay buried forever. And so the truth about the Kellerman murders began to surface slowly, carefully, and in a way that even Samuel Briggs could never have predicted. By the spring of 1889, 34 years after the tragedy, the chain of events was set in motion by Briggs himself. Now 67, frail and wasting away from coal dust-scarred lungs, he lay in a bed at Louisville's Charity Hospital, visited by Father Michael O'Brien, a compassionate Irish priest known for ministering to the city's poorest and most forgotten. What began as a simple visit to administer last rites turned into something far more extraordinary. Feverish and haunted Briggs began to speak of the Kellermans, not as victims of an accident, but as targets in a meticulously planned killing. At first, O'Brien dismissed the ramblings as delirium, but the precision of the details soon changed his mind. Briggs described the mine's timber supports and ventilation system exactly as they had been. In 1855, recalled word-for-word conversations with Jeremiah Whitlock in locked offices and recounted private moments from the Kellerman's last morning, Martha's comments about the weather. The children's chatter details no outsider should have known. He outlined step by step how he had placed the explosives to mimic a natural collapse, how he'd steered the rescue effort away from dangerous truths, and how he'd fed misinformation into the official investigation. The contradiction in his words was chilling his pride in the flawless execution of the plan, mingled with real anguish over the innocent lives it claimed. He admitted to years of drinking to dull the guilt, yet spoke of his work as though it were an engineer's masterpiece. Father O'Brien faced an impossible conflict. The seal of confession forbade him from revealing what Briggs had told him, but his conscience could not let such a crime remain buried. The solution he devised was to investigate the case himself, uncover evidence through independent means, and allow others to discover the truth without him ever directly breaking his vows. He began with the public record. The original investigation's report leaned heavily on technical testimony from Samuel Briggs. Yet there was no proof of Briggs's qualifications, no independent review of his geological claims. More damning, O'Brien found that Sheriff Marcus Webb had received substantial financial backing from Cumberland Coal and Rail during his election campaign support that had never been disclosed during the case. Cumberland was his largest donor, the one that had carried him to victory over a more experienced rival. From there, O'Brien tracked down survivors. Many had passed on or left the mountains, but a handful of elderly witnesses still remembered. Their memories compared to the official version exposed glaring inconsistencies. The most valuable find was Thomas Hartley, now 71, living with his daughter in Lexington. Hartley had never accepted the accident explanation and had preserved a meticulous archive. His original note from the morning of December 23rd detailed observations of the mine's condition and a timeline of troubling events leading up to the collapse. Hartley's papers corroborated much of Briggs's confession. He'd recorded the presence of strangers on the ridges above the Kellerman property. In the weeks before the disaster, the sudden withdrawal of credit from local merchants and the baseless legal challenges to Hinrich's land ownership. He'd also kept copies of the original geological surveys Hinrich commissioned before purchase documents showing the rock was stable with no fault lines in the area. These findings directly contradicted the false reports Briggs had fabricated to justify the structural failure story. Father O'Brien now had two things: the private truth from a dying man's lips and the public documented evidence to begin dismantling 34 years of lies. The original geological surveys Heinrich Kellerman had commissioned, proving the mine's stability, had been filed with the county clerk decades earlier, yet somehow omitted from Sheriff Webb's 1855 investigation. The oversight now looked far too deliberate to be coincidence. With this mounting evidence, Father O'Brien needed a way to bring the truth to light without violating the seal of confession. He turned to Daniel Morrison, a relentless investigative journalist for the Louisville Courier-Journal, known for exposing corruption in Kentucky's coal industry. O'Brien arranged their meeting to appear accidental, striking up conversation at a public mining safety forum. Casually, he mentioned his interest in historic mining disasters and hinted at having found unusual documents on the Kellerman case. Morrison's curiosity was immediate. When O'Brien shared the materials framing them as historical research, the journalist recognized the telltale signs of a cover-up. Morrison launched his own investigation, broadening it beyond the Kellermans to examine Cumberland Coal and Rail's long history of acquiring mineral rights through coercion and fraud. The breakthrough came when he uncovered financial records showing unusually large payments from Cumberland to Samuel Briggs in late 1855, timed precisely with the Kellerman collapse. Officially listed as consulting fees, they dwarfed standard surveying rates and had no supporting documentation. Digging further, Morrison traced similar payments to Briggs whenever the company acquired disputed properties. Witness interviews in Pine Ridge confirmed another lie, despite corporate records claiming Whitlock had no role in the Kellerman land purchase. Townsfolk remembered him clearly, visiting weeks after the disaster, armed with an uncanny knowledge of the mine's reserves. Then came the most damning find of all. In a trunk Briggs had left behind with his landlady were explosives receipts, detailed maps of the Kellerman mine, and a hand-drawn blast diagram that matched the actual collapse pattern exactly. On September 15, 1889, Morrison's four-part exposé titled "Murder in the Mines Company Conspiracy Behind Kellerman Family Deaths Exposed After 34 Years" rocked Kentucky. It meticulously dismantled the accident narrative, revealing the intimidation campaign, falsified geological evidence, and financial motives behind the killings. Public outrage was immediate. State and federal investigations followed, lawsuits poured in, and coal buyers across the Ohio Valley boycotted Cumberland's product. Within days, its stock price crashed and contracts were canceled. For Jeremiah Whitlock, now 73, the scandal was ruinous. The visionary industrialist, who had built an empire on stolen wealth, was recast as the architect of a corporate murder. Overwhelmed by disgrace and mounting legal peril, he aged visibly, shuffling between lawyers' offices in a desperate bid to shield himself. Just 3 weeks after Morrison's first article, Whitlock died of a heart attack. His funeral, once intended as a civic celebration, was sparsely attended and overshadowed by protesters demanding justice. The legal aftermath was messy. With most conspirators long dead and key evidence lost, criminal prosecutions were limited. Kentucky filed posthumous charges against Briggs and began investigating Cumberland's entire corporate history. The Kellerman case became a rallying cry for labor reformers and mining safety advocates, cited in congressional hearings and used to push for stronger oversight and harsher penalties for corporate crime. The scandal also unleashed a wave of reopened investigations into other accidents across Appalachia, some of which were revealed to be deliberate acts of corporate violence. Cumberland Coal and Rail, unable to survive the lawsuits, boycotts, and collapse of investor confidence, declared bankruptcy within 6 months, its empire reduced to rubble, much like the mine it had buried the Kellermans in. The Kellerman mine's final chapter was one Hinrich himself might have met with a bitter smile. After Cumberland Coal and Rail collapsed, its assets were broken apart and sold off, with the mine passing into the hands of a worker-owned cooperative. For decades, that cooperative ran the operation under strict safety standards, sharing profits among the miners rather than funneling them to distant shareholders. No family in Pine Ridge ever again suffered a fate like the Kellermans. Thomas Hartley lived to see his long campaign for truth vindicated. Lauded as a local hero, he spent his later years speaking to mining towns about the necessity of questioning authority and demanding corporate accountability. His meticulous notes, preserved in the Kentucky State Archives, became a permanent reminder that even ordinary citizens could stand against entrenched power if they were armed with facts and resolve. Father Michael O'Brien carried the moral weight of the Kellerman case for the rest of his life. He never revealed his role in uncovering the truth, but his private papers found after his death documented the delicate balance he struck between honoring the confessional seal and pursuing justice. His careful indirect methods would later be studied by ethicists and historians as a model for navigating conflicts between religious duty and public responsibility. The Kellerman tragedy transcended local history. In the Progressive Era, it became a rallying point for labor activists, journalists, and reformers nationwide, a cautionary example of how unchecked corporate power could destroy lives and bury the truth for decades. By the early 20th century, it was cited in congressional hearings on mine safety and corporate regulation, shaping reforms meant to protect workers from exploitation. When the coal seam was finally exhausted in 1955, exactly 1 century after the murders, the site was transformed into a memorial that told the unvarnished truth. Built from limestone quarried by Hinrich himself, the monument bore the names of Heinrich, Martha Johann, Maria Wilhelm, and Elizabeth Kellerman, with an inscription that did not hide behind euphemism. German immigrants who came to America seeking opportunity and found instead that even in the land of the free, some lives were considered expendable when measured against corporate profits. Murdered, December 23, 1855, for refusing to surrender their dreams to industrial greed. The memorial became a pilgrimage site for labor historians, activists, and ordinary visitors, with a museum housing artifacts from the investigation. Morrison's original articles, Father O'Brien's research, Hartley's notes, and even Briggs's chilling sabotage diagrams. School programs used the story to teach about the intersection of labor rights, industrial history, and ethics, underscoring the need for independent journalism and grassroots activism. The Kellerman case ultimately stood as proof that while corporate influence can suppress truth for decades, conscience evidence and shifting public values can bring it to light. It revealed the darker undercurrents of the Gilded Age, where progress was often built on quiet atrocities, and demonstrated that justice, however delayed, can still reclaim the narrative from official lies. Yet it also raised unsettling questions. Was justice truly served after 34 years, or had the system already failed by allowing the crime to succeed for so long? And how many other such tragedies remain buried, their victims' names lost beneath the polished myths of America's industrial rise? Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.